Honestly, I've had a few paranormal experiences that I can remember growing up, and it's hard to choose just one, but this one sticks out to me because once I opened up about what I saw, it was affirmed by the owners of the house where I saw it. I was a senior in high school, and one of my friend's homes was a very popular spot for parties, as her parents were well off and normally on cruises or something like that while they left the kids at home. The parties were always pretty well the same: music, beer, games, etc. Although I was never really a huge drinker, so I always went to just hang out with friends and not to get wasted. And as a result, I was usually always the only coherent one as the night reached the morning hours. The layout of the main floor was circular, and by that I mean the foyer connected to a sitting room, the sitting room connected to a dining room, which connects to the kitchen, which walks through to the living room, which connects back to the foyer. So from the living room, you can see into the dining room through a doorway and into the sitting room at the same time, with the central wall of the main floor obscuring your view between them. And this is important to describe how I saw what I saw. This particular night, as the party died down and most of the attendees left, it was just our core group of friends that were left at the house. 6 or 7 of us, and about 2 a.m. we decided to put a movie on and all fall asleep while watching it to end the night. 20 minutes or so into the movie, there were only 3 of us left awake, and this is when I saw it. I was sitting on the floor in front of the couch watching the movie, and I felt like I saw something moving through the kitchen, so I turned my head to see what it was, and I saw what looked like an extremely tall, thin man, like head scraping the ceiling tall, with elongated limbs, not unlike the depictions of Slender Man, walking past the doorway into the dining room. I lost sight of him, or it, when it walked behind the wall past the other side of the door frame, so I sat up to get a better look at the doorway of the sitting room, which was the direction he was headed to, and a second or two later, he crossed the sitting room doorway again, only this time it was crawling on its hands and knees. I didn't know what was happening, so I froze and kept staring at the doorframe long after he disappeared. When I decided to look away, my 2 friends who were still awake were staring at me. One asked what I was looking at, which I didn't really answer. I brushed it off like maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, considering it was super late, and that side of the house was very dark at the time. Despite this, I told my friend whose house it was a few days later at school what I saw, and she thought it was pretty creepy. But the kicker was, a week or so later, she came up to me at school and told me that she had talked to her parents about what I saw that night, and in her words, their faces went white and wide-eyed. And she proceeded to tell me that they had both seen a tall, thin man in their home lurking around. In the woods just a little ways down from my hometown here in Michigan, there's a stormwater system. The mouth of the exit is a popular hangout spot for the local teens looking to binge drink and hang out without worrying about getting caught. Graffiti and amateur wall art litters the walls for almost a mile into the tunnels, but nobody seems to have ventured beyond that point, and now I know why. It started on a Friday night like any other. I'm a male who was around 16 when this happened. My friends and I were hanging out, drinking, and just generally goofing around when we decided to play Truth or Dare, minus the truth part. When it was my turn, one of my friends, who we'll call Mike for the story, dared me to venture into the tunnels further than anybody had evidently ventured before. Naturally, I didn't want to look like a wimp, so I accepted the challenge. In actuality, darkness terrified me, and always had. The thought of the unknown almost made me retch, but I didn't want to let some of the girls see me chicken out. So I grabbed a flashlight, and I made my way inside. Listening to the pitter-patter of my sneakers sloshing in the murky stream that was coming out of the tunnels, The sound soon drowned out the laughter and giggles of my group of friends who were falling further and further behind me as I continued to venture forward. After about 10 minutes of walking, the graffiti was evidently becoming less frequent. The odd phalluses and the likes dotted here or there, but I thought I was coming to the furthest point in the tunnels when I reached a fork. To the right, the tunnel continued further than I could make out, and to the left, there was a step up and a smaller, more compact tunnel heading deeper into the darkness. Figuring that the left one was more spooky, it'd make for a far better story when I'd later emerge triumphant in my efforts and tell my friends about my adventure. So, I went left and walked for about another 15 minutes or so. As I was starting to tell myself that this was far enough, I stumbled into a cavernous clearing, a rectangular room with 2 more forks tunneling deeper into the void ahead. I stopped and took a breath, taking in the sights of this odd little room, when all of a sudden a pungent odor filled my nostrils. It smelled like rotting meat. I swung my flashlight around trying to locate the source of the smell, and, to my horror, I saw a pile of rotting animal corpses and bones to the right of the tunnel. They were just piled there like some kind of sick animal death mound. I spilled my guts out right there on the floor, and the sight of the rotting animal corpses and the smell that accompanied them was just too much for me to bear. The sound of my dry heaving and vomiting seemed to echo up and down the tunnels, and it dawned on me just how alone I was. As I composed myself, I stood up straight, getting ready to head back in record time. But in that moment, I heard something that chilled me to the core. A low rumbling growl and hiss emanated from some distance behind the rotting corpses. I quickly shone my flashlight down the tunnel where I heard the sounds, and, staring back at me, were 2 white glowing eyes. With each second I stood, stuck in fear, those eyes drew closer and closer, and the growl, almost like a hiss, grew louder. Emerging from the darkness was a pale humanoid figure, crawling on all 4s. Its arms were abnormally long, with elongated fingers ending in sharp claws. I quickly snapped out of my daze as my fight-or-flight reflex kicked in. I turned to run, and I began running faster than I ever had in my entire life. I wasn't fit by any means, but I wasn't going to let myself die in these godforsaken tunnels. With each step, I heard that thing growling and panting behind me, gaining on me with each second. It seemed almost angry that I even made it have to chase me, and I've never been so petrified in my entire life. As I got back to the fork I'd entered through earlier, I swear I felt it swipe at me, just grazing my back. My screams must have traveled down the tunnels because when I exited, none of my friends were still in sight. Some friends, I thought, panting and trying to catch my breath. That thing seemed to have given up after it swiped at me. I look at the world through a different lens now. I will not return to those woods or the tunnels ever again. As for my friends, well, it took me a little while to forgive them, but we're cool now. Okay, this may sound stupid, but if you were in my shoes, you would probably have been scared silly yourself. I was about 15 years old, and I had just made some new friends at school, and we all had a mutual interest, which was urban exploring. We lived in a small town in the Netherlands, and in this town nothing ever really happened. So when we went outside to explore and found an old abandoned police station, my friends and I had the brilliant idea to explore it just because it was huge. We agreed to meet each other at the main entrance of the building around 9 p.m. So when 9 p.m. rolled around, we were all at the entrance, ready to go inside. This building gave off a creepy vibe with broken windows and vegetation growing on the building, but we were also fascinated by this, so we continued further into the building. We went everywhere from the front desk to the roof and eventually down to the basement. And at one moment, I thought I saw someone walking across the hall, but my friends told me it was just my imagination, so I blew it off and continued with our exploration. At one point, we were near the old prison cells when all of a sudden I heard something behind me. When I turned around, there was a huge guy, like 7 feet tall, with a clown's mask on. I screamed for my friends to run, but when I turned around and tried to start running away, the guy in the clown mask jumped on top of me, screaming in my face,
"What are you doing here? Do you want to get hurt?"
I almost peed my pants and said, "No, sir, I'm so sorry, we will leave immediately." After I said that, he got off of me and let me go, to my great relief, and when I turned around near the entrance, I saw him just casually walking back into the area with the prison cells. My friends were already outside and asking me if I was okay. At that moment, one of my friends yelled that the clown was at the door. We all turned around and saw him and began running like hell back towards my house. The next day, one of my friends told me that he knew who the clown was, and come to find out, it was his older brother trying to play a joke on us and scare us so that we would never go back in there again. Safe to say he did a good job because I obviously was not in on the joke and was honestly terrified.